DJ Ferris.
The Chicago, nigga.
It's the real one.
Hit me.
Only one is pulling shit the fuck up.
Let's get a sports talk.
Football season, and Paul Feinbaum, who's your early Heisman pick?
I like Trevor Lawrence. He was the favorite last year, Greeny. He struggled. He tried too hard to beat Tom Brady and Peyton Manning.
Like, hopefully he have a bounce back year. Because last year, he seemed to come out trying to force everything and do too much. That's why he was supposed to be the favorite last season. But when you came out and tried to do extra things, it messed you up and took you out of the Heisman race because of your play on the field. Like, he was making mistakes because he was trying to do too much. If he would have just did what he did for the year before, but he wasn't forcing anything, he would have came to the year doing the same thing. He'd have been just fine, but he was just trying to do a whole lot. And this is going to be his bounce back year.
And Russell Wilson all wrapped into one. And when he finally calmed down, he got them on a rhythm. He got stymied in the championship game, but I think he'll come back better than ever. And his team is looking very good as a chance to make a run for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think most people would expect them to. But Laura Rutledge, give me a sleeper team that could wind up in the Final Four.
I'm going to give you the Florida Gators. I think they are positioned well to potentially be there. They've got Kyle Trask, who figures...
Yes, they're in a position. Florida just had to be consistent. They started out looking like a top team, and then they go on these skis of losing games, and then they keep them from making the playoffs. This year, they got to be more consistent. Don't have that inconsistent in the middle of the season. They gotta play all through and not have them hiccups and mistakes and everything, and then they start collapsing, and that's how they end up playing in the Orange Bowl, because they had lost that game. They knock them out of the playoffs. They gotta be more consistent this season.
Be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, and Dan Mullen has just been waiting to get that offense going at an even higher clip than it already was. They'd have to get past Georgia, which would be a tall task, but it would be a great feather in their cap if they could do it ahead of the playoff.
And then finally, Paul, who do you have when it's all said and done winning the championship?
I don't want to shock you here, Greeny, but I'm going with Alabama. And I'm going with Alabama for a specific reason. It has been 2 years, 2 long years since they won a championship. And Nick Saban probably will find his team ranked number 3 in the preseason behind Ohio State and Clemson. They've got an extra grind, and they can be very dangerous. And one more thing, I think Saban has taken advantage of the offseason while other coaches have been wondering, what am I supposed to be doing right now?
Laura, how about you? You with Paul on Bama? Who do you have winning the whole thing?
I have Clemson winning the whole thing. I think they obviously have some positions to replace, but they return so much with Trevor Lawrence, who, by the way, has not forgotten about that loss to LSU in last season.
Like, Alabama ain't won a championship in 2 years. Last season, their defense was kind of shaky. It wasn't the same defense because they had players suspended, injured, and it kind of took their defense a different way because they didn't have all their players there. This season, they gonna have they whole defensive player, and in Clemson they can win it too because they return they Heisman quarterback, and they return some players, so they could end up winning it.
He's going to want to come out with a vengeance and prove that he really is the top guy in college football and the top guy in the draft. Plus, Justin Ross, the wide receiver, they have so much on the offensive side that even some of the things they might need to work on defensively after losing Isaiah Simmons, I think they're in a really good position to win it all this coming season.
Well, look, we've talked so much about whether or not there'll be fans in the city. Let's talk a little football here for a moment. Clemson always feels like a good pick to me, Paul, because they have the easier path, the far easier path to get there from the ACC. Alabama didn't even make it out of the SEC last year, but LSU lost so much. Who is Alabama's primary competition this year in the SEC?
Georgia, and they could face Georgia twice. I know Laura picked Florida, but sorry, she's going to have to be wrong about this one. Georgia plays Alabama September 19th on the schedule in Tuscaloosa, so that's an advantage Alabama. Alabama has Southern Cal in the first game. Whether that game comes off, we don't know. They have to go to LSU, but I think you're right. LSU has missed too many pieces. I think they'll have a really good season. They could win 10 or 11 games.
Yeah, they're going to have a solid season, but they ain't going to have the same season last season, how they had it when they made a run, won a championship. Because they got to replace Joe Burrow. They got to replace Jefferson. They got to replace multiple players in the big holes. So they're going to be a very solid team this season, not the same team from last year. It's going to be a 10-win type team this season, or an 11-win season for them. And they ain't going to be the same.
I don't think they'll win the championship. And then they have Auburn at home, and we'll probably have to face Georgia again. So Georgia is the nemesis. Or could be the nemesis.
Laura, what Alabama has not won, as Paul mentions, they've not won the last couple of years. Generally, they've not won with what they became, which is this high-flying offense led by the spectacular quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa. I know that he won the championship in the overtime the year before, but that was sort of coming off out of the bullpen, if you will. Do we expect to see Alabama, for those who've not followed the offseason closely, will they go back to more of a Saban kind of blueprint? Is this going to be more of a defense and run the football team?
You could see it. I mean, look, I think the key from their offensive side, if you're talking about maybe getting away from some of the high-flying offense and some of the just electric offense that we've seen before, is that they have an incredible running back in Najee Harris, who we saw a little bit at times over the last couple of seasons, but he never really seemed like he was the guy that they could be, super reliant on, even though he has that ability. He was a great friend of Tua Tagovailoa's. I think Najee Harris could be key to them really kind of getting back to what you mentioned, more of the ground and pound offensive philosophy, and then really getting the defense shored up in a way that, they would say this is more what Alabama's defense is supposed to be. Last year, they dealt with a ton of injuries that influenced that, and I think that was a big part of what happened with them, especially down the stretch. You think about that Iron Bowl that was one of the highest scoring, if not the highest scoring ever, had to do with the defensive breakdown.
And that's what it's going to go back to. It's going to go back to Nick Saban defense and him running the football. And not the same offense they was running with to it. They're going to do something different and go back to his style of play. And that's how they going to do it this season. And not have to have fun offense they had. They're going to do it Nick Saban way.
Alabama side. So I'm with Paul on the idea that I think they will be a lot better when it comes to what Saban expects out of this team.
Yeah, that's how he built the dynasty down there that he won. But let me go quickly back to Trevor Lawrence, because we've been hearing from, I think Mel, we had this conversation, and I know Bobby Carpenter, is that Trevor Lawrence, when it's all said and done, may not even wind up being the first quarterback taken in the draft next year, the first pick in the draft next year, because the kid at Ohio State has everybody going. Paul, what do you think the chances are? We would never have guessed that Joe Burrow would be the first pick in this past year's draft, that Trevor Lawrence actually winds up getting passed up.
I don't think it's very high, and I'm not a recruiting or an NFL draft expert. I'm just giving you an honest opinion from the end of the bar. But Trevor Lawrence, to me, just is the personification of an NFL player. Justin Fields is extraordinarily good. Remember, Justin Fields started at Georgia. He couldn't beat out Jake Fromm, and he was the talk of the college football season in the second half last year for Ohio State. But I still think Trevor Lawrence has the look of an NFL star, and I will be very surprised sitting here at the end of May if he's not chosen next April.
Laura, Lawrence or Fields for the Heisman?
I would go ahead and say Justin Fields wins the Heisman, but I think that's going to have to do more with the type of games, the type of competition that Ohio State is going to have. That said, I still think that Trevor Lawrence is likely the number one.
Because Justin Fields, they wanted to see how he was going to play with Ohio State. And when he came on the scene and he threw no interception for a few games, he ain't throw none at all until probably like the sixth game. That's when he started throwing picks. Like, he had a solid year for Ohio State last season, and let's see, can he duplicate that this season for them? Because he's going to be in the Heisman talk this season because the play he had last year. Because how he finished the season, and how he began the season. And now he's going to be this year in talk of the Heisman. And then being one of the top picks in the draft this year coming up.
An overall pick, and like I told you before, I'm picking Clemson as my national champion. So as all this shakes out, I think those two are going to be neck and neck for all of it. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be more like the Trevor Lawrence that we saw as a freshman than he was as a sophomore next season.
About 100 days away from the season, you're already disagreeing, and candidly, as far as I'm concerned, that's the Thank you for watching ESPN on